Right, Carlton King is a former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But actually, we've outgrown that, to be fair. What we really do is we look at geopolitics in the round. We look at what actually makes this world function. From, the economics of the world, to the politics of the world, to the kinetic activities that go on. We cover it all here. And oftentimes we do that with our partners in crime in Pass the Thruple. So that was Dr. Rachel looking at medical and all other aspects that come from that. And then actually one of the kingpins, to be fair, Firgas Esack, who looks at the media, because in our world today, as we see it, the media, small, big, mainstream media, and even now the sort of independent medias, they are actually the body that really does inform and focus our lives. Whether they are in cahoots with the politicians and the money makers, the billionaires, etc., or whether they're those kind of, I don't know, what would you call them? I suppose you'd call them swashbuckling individuals who are out on their own trying to make a difference in the media field without a lot of backup. So today, what I want to do is I actually want Fergus to take the strength of this whole podcast, really, because she's written a article recent, I think it's last week, and the article is, I find it very, very interesting, and I thought it's an article that you guys should also listen to. It's, there's a big question. What happens to the money that you borrow from somebody? Where does that borrowing go? Where does that money go? Where does your debt go? If you've got debt, where does it go? Who owns it? What do they do with it? That's what we're going to look at today. Fergs, welcome to the show again.
Hey, hello. It's good to be back. It's nice.
Great to have you back.
Did you miss me?
Absolutely. Great to have you back. Yeah.
So I didn't come empty-handed, Carlton, because I brought a guest.
Fantastic.
And he would be, I think he'd be, I think swashbuckling individual is a great way to describe him. So, yes, you're correct. I was commissioned to write this article. Thank you for enjoying it. We can share the link to it in the podcast notes.
Super.
But I was commissioned by a wonderful human called Bowie Dolan, and he is the editor of a publication called Contractor UK, which I hadn't previously heard of, not being in the industry myself. But it is actually a publication that challenges ideas within the professional sector. Again, I would encourage professionals who are engaged within the contracting sphere to read it and to join the forum, although one of the incredibly gratifying things is that there seems to be an incredibly engaged community already, which is a testament to the editor. So I will, without further ado, let him introduce himself.
Well, Carlton, Fergus, it's a pleasure to be on the podcast. I really appreciate the invitation. So my name is Bowie Dolan. So I'm the editor and CEO of Contractor UK. We like to think of ourselves as the UK's leading online contractor resource. By that, I mean the self-employed in the UK, we find it's very difficult to get support. It's very difficult to actually go from permanent employment to working for yourself, setting up a company, looking for the correct insurance, for example, actually finding contract roles and just getting advice. So the purpose of Contractor UK is to change that a little bit and to bring back a sense of community, really. And in a way, bring back a little bit of a workplace chat really between all of these professionals who are working in what appears to be sometimes a very lonely industry. So it's a really interesting website and it's got a very good community behind it. But with Fergus, we've now started branching out when it comes to our news and our guides into more investigative research. And one topic that came up over and over again, which we'll cover on this podcast, is the loan charge recall scandal, which is something I believe your listeners will be very interested in and is something which, at least in my opinion, I believe is as bad as the post office scandal in a way and is still unraveling.
So we'll explain in granular detail what this is. So first and foremost, welcome. Thank you for joining the conversation today. As a little anecdote to the listeners, because I know they like my fun anecdotes. Well,
Do they?
you know, I don't know. Do they? Do they? I put them in anyway.
Of course they do, folks.
I stick them in anyway, but you know. So I went to uni in Chicago, and at the time I worked for this radio station called WHPK, and I would say they called the show that I had like the early breakfast show, but really it was like the graveyard shift. It was like from like 5 a.m. right? So basically, the only people that listened to it were like truckers or dirty stop outs, right? And despite the fact that I was shagging the producer, so there wasn't a level of nepotism there. I think that they gave me the job because everybody loves your British accent. So I used to have people phone in all the time, and you know, so I'd say, hey, look, let's have a topic conversation. Who's doing what? Like, hey, there's a thunderstorm. Is anybody experiencing you know, the thunderstorm? Does anyone want to talk about it? And like without fail, people would just call in and they would say, hey, your British accent is so cute. And they'd say aluminum, and I'd say aluminium, and then they'd go, ooh, say Bowie, and then I'd go Bowie, and they go, that's so neat. So I'm really glad that
you got there in the end, folks.
Bowie on the call or on the pod, right? So anyway, look, without further ado, right? So this loan charge recall scandal is something that until I was commissioned to write this story, I had never heard of. I didn't realise that it has affected tens of thousands of individuals. And at the time that I was briefed on this, I was staying at my parents' house. And my stepdad, who is retired, was in the kitchen, and I came downstairs and I said, wow, I've just come off this call and had this fascinating conversation, and I've never heard about all of this thing. And he said, oh, yeah, I was affected by that. You know, so were lots of my friends. We were on a contract for the NHS years ago, and oh, you know, what are the names of the companies? And, you know, da, da, da. And he said, you have to write this story because, you know, so many of us got completely, well, in his words, screwed. So it's not, this isn't really a tax story. It's a story about trust. So tens of thousands of ordinary professionals, IT workers, engineers, NHS staff, oil and gas contractors were persuaded into arrangements that they were told were compliant. So in short, the government's HMRC didn't really want these professionals, these professional contractors to be self-employed. They wanted them to be paid via these loan schemes. So essentially they would have a monthly salary or a, you know, weekly salary or whatever. They would get a pay slip, and it would say, you know, X amount of your salary comes from this loan. No national insurance was paid on it and no tax was paid on it. In many cases, the contractors were informed that the only way to secure the role was to be complicit to these schemes. They were told that the wording of loan was all but semantics, and that it was completely above board, and that HMRC was, was supporting it. So, unfortunately, then many years later, in a lot of cases, possibly decades later, HMRC then came after them for the tax. Now, a lot of the contractors were surprised. I mean, I would say the majority of the contractors were very surprised by this, but a lot of them did kind of get the fear because it's HMRC, and they paid back the tax. Some of them did, some of them didn't. However, then, even more horrifically, the same people are being asked to repay the loans, in inverted commas. So the investigation, the article, wasn't really about whether or not people avoided tax. The article was, who are these loan companies? How did they end up? How did these umbrella companies who existed historically to allow big companies to employ contractors, how did these how did these umbrella companies acquire these loans? How did they then, at what point did they then decide to recall them, and who is authorizing them? Who's endorsing them, and is it legal? Now, at the same time, whilst we will talk about all of this, and we'll talk about who they are and what they did and how they did it. The thing that hit me the hardest was that HMRC themselves, in terms of HMRC themselves, publicly acknowledged that 10 individuals had taken their own lives because of this. And there were also additionally 24 suicide attempts. So
folks, I just
it's
want to
horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah, I just want to bring Bowie in here because he's obviously given you the task to look into the story. As you call it story, don't you? So I'm using your terminology. I don't actually like story really, but I use that
Scandal
terminology. Yeah, into the scandal. But what I want to know is why? What grabbed you? Because I've never heard of this. So how did you hear of it? Were many contractors complaining? Because I'm presuming this is very strong in the public sector. Was it also in the private sector? And how did they get to know about these loans? So those are the two things I'd like to ask you on that, if possible.
Of course, so this all goes back quite a long way. So the benefits of working for yourself is that you can essentially, instead of working for somebody else and paying PAYE, obviously traditional income tax, working for yourself is a little bit different. So what you can do is set up your own company and then work with some different employers. And then through that, you can pay obviously 12,570 what you get tax-free on. And then the rest of the money you can take out as in the form of a dividend. So it's a lot more tax efficient than it would be for working for someone. So that's what brings a lot of people into contracting as a whole. But the government, to sort of start getting around that, have introduced sort of disguised employee checks in the form of what they call being IR35. So you're either inside IR35, in which case you're a disguised employee looking for the tax benefits, or outside IR35, where you are essentially working for different employers and you're your own company. So this is how that all started, really. And then a lot of people who were caught inside IR35 and could not run their own company then started using these umbrella companies. So umbrella companies operate a little bit like an intermediary. So you would work for the umbrella company and you would essentially get PAYE from the umbrella company, which would allow you to work on a contract. But what ended up happening, this was about 10, 15 years ago, it's been going on for a while with this whole loan charge thing originally, is that a lot of people were told by certain umbrella companies that they could have a much higher take-home pay if they took the 12,570 out. And then for the rest of the money, instead of paying PAYE, what they would do is take it out in the form of a loan that would not be repayable, but they would get it as a loan, and then the loan wouldn't be taxable. So this is where that whole scandal started. And obviously, this was a grey area. It was a tax dodge, and HMRC cracked down on it really hard.
Sorry, bro, can I just jump in there? Because this is the important factor, because people listening now will already, because we all do it, try to sort of put the blame on somebody, be it the HMRC or be it the individual who's got into the scheme. I want to know whether it was really something to do with individuals looking for a way to pay less tax, and therefore you could argue to evade tax, or was it that they were being told by specialists, accountants, whomever, that this is the route to go down, and they just followed? Which is the preponderance of that?
So just to put it into context in terms of the timeline, I mean, I think Gordon Brown brought in IR35, didn't he? And then then George Osborne introduced the loan charge. So in terms of the in terms of the sort of political heritage. But yeah, no, look, I'll let Bowie answer the question. But yes, you're right. I mean, everybody, the first thing that you do think of is sort of who's to blame.
Who's to blame is a bit of a difficult one in this situation. So, Carlton, in answer to your question, it's a bit of a 50-50. So there were obviously people aware of what was going on with this whole situation and aware that it was a bit dodgy, some people signing on to these schemes. But there were many others, and we have had contractors reach out to us who weren't aware of it whatsoever. They were just told it was completely normal, and in order to work for a client, they need to go through this sort of structure, and everyone else does it, and essentially not to question it. So that's where it gets really interesting, and that's where our investigation goes in a way, where whose responsibility is it? Even though HMRC decides it's the contractors, is it really?
Yes, and one of the things that one of the incredibly humbling things about interviewing so many of the contractors for this article is that they actually in many cases did take advice, and there were many accountants or recruitment consultants or HR professionals who simply presented the scheme as a fait accompli, and actually sometimes some of these contractors were sort of challenging the situation, and they were actually just being told that, well, do you want the job or don't you? This is what everybody else does. This is just how this exists. And so I guess if you put yourself into a recruitment situation, and especially if you've got mouths to feed and a mortgage to pay, I guess you just accept that just is how that's that particular organization's protocol. And as I say, these were big companies that were doing this. These were big insurance companies, big asset management companies, blue light companies.
I'd like you to delve into that actually in a short while, but I just want to just round it for the listener, because the only one that I've really heard of with this type of thing, and I think the listener will have heard about it as well, is if you go back, maybe, was it 10 years, and you had the Alan Carr situation, and you had Mr. Britain from Take That, what's he called, the lead singer? He fell foul, and some various footballers fell foul of a similar
the icebreaker scam, yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
A similar system where they were, putting money in movies or putting money in this, that, and the other, which they knew wouldn't function, but they were getting the money back. And it was, actually legal in a sense. But subsequently, it was perceived as tax avoidance. Is that what we're talking about? Or is it even less intuitive than that, in terms of, if I'm Joe Soap opening a business, I've been whatever, as a professional and now want to do my own business, and I go to a big company and I say, this is what I've got to offer as a consultant, and he says, well, yeah, we'll take you, we're fantastic, but you need to sign on to our system. Is it more like that? So the guy doesn't think, or gal doesn't think, is this some sort of scheme? No, they're just thinking, oh, that's the mode of employment. Is it more that route, or was it more like the icebreaker, where actually most of them knew there was something, that a loophole that they could jump onto? Which is it, Bowie or Fergs? You've written the
Well, do you know what?
Which one is it?
I worked on an investigation into icebreaker, and I also worked on the post office scandal. And I would say, to Bowie's earlier point, it's actually more akin to the post office scandal, because the contractors involved, I believe, are victims. And to your earlier point, Carlton, looking at the way that the icebreaker deals were structured, yes, I think it would be quite difficult to enter into one of those, to enter into an icebreaker deal and have your eyes shut. But as I say, with the loan charge recall, it was much more coercive.
It was weird. It was coercive in the way that people just had so much put in front of them. It's a bit like going into contracting, is a bit like moving country. You've got so much paperwork to do with HMRC, with Companies House, all sorts of stuff, so many things to do, that no reasonable person can be expected to investigate every aspect of what they're doing. And that's how I feel like a lot of people got caught up into this. And the big firms, they weren't particularly involved in any of this at all. But in order for contractors to work with the bigger firms, they would have to go through this sort of middleman umbrella company. And it was a lot of them who, to increase their margins, were running either themselves or through a third party operating these schemes where no income tax would be paid.
That makes sense. So you've got the big firm, which is kind of sitting back off it, and is not really bothered where they get the specialist capability from, as long as they get it. And then you've got the people who are feeding off the king's table, who think, instead of just getting a piece of breast, I can get a leg and a breast. That's basically what you're saying. Looking at the medieval perspective of that, where it's thrown off the table to the people below. So yeah, so I can see that. So what we're saying then, in general, we are not blaming people like the old-fashioned, for want of a better word, Nigerian prince scheme, whereby if you give me £1,000, I'll give you 8 million. I just need to be able to unlock this corruptly, and your £1,000 will allow me to do it corruptly. So you know what you're doing from day one. That's not what we're talking about. We're generally talking about, as I'm perceiving it from what you guys are saying, we're generally talking about things that any person could actually fall into. Is that correct?
Yes, back in the day, it was something that everyone could fall into, because these companies obviously take a margin and you get given a salary that comes back minus their margin. But what happened was, there were some companies that were giving you more money back, but it didn't come across like you weren't paying any income tax whatsoever. For a lot of contractors, they may have just thought that the company was running leaner. That's where the problem sort of ramps up with this, and how a lot of people inadvertently got caught up in some really bizarre sort of schemes to get for the companies to get around paying tax with their money, the contractors' money.
So how and why is HMRC coming to the contractor for the money, both either you, Fergs, or Boy, is coming for the money, and not to the middleman? Or have they gone to the middle person
The
already?
middle people have been shut down, yes, or are under investigation. But what's quite interesting with the UK and UK tax law is that you are ultimately responsible for your own tax affairs. So regardless if it goes through someone else, it's in the same manner that if an accountant forgets to file something, you're liable. The accountant isn't, in the eyes of HMRC.
Right.
Yes, and another thing that it's quite akin to, I would say, is the stamp duty fraud companies who sort of lured people in as in sort of, oh hey, actually, it's completely fine. Stamp duty's archaic. Don't worry. We'll do this all for you. And then HMRC sort of again came after the individuals, because those companies that brokered those scams have been shut down. But one of the things that, so when I was briefed on this article, I thought, right, okay, this is going to be, an hour's worth of looking at Companies House, and then, I'll start writing. But no, I mean, no. When you start looking for these original companies, every company led to another company, and the point here is that the original companies, as Bowie said, have been have shut down, have ceased trading, possibly a decade ago. But then there are these other companies that bought the loans. So they bought the assets from these dissolved companies.
Yeah. So
that's where it gets really interesting, because these so if we sort of look at this as a diagram, so we've got Company A, the umbrella company. Then we've got HMRC, and then Company A shuts down. HMRC has been either paid or not paid back or whatever. So then you've got the layer where you've got these poor contractors who are thinking, oh gosh, I've paid HMRC. Hopefully this will all go away. Never have to hear about it again. I mean, one contractor actually at this point in the layer cake had just been granted probate on his on the deceased parent's flat and had to sell the flat in order to pay back HMRC. But at that point thought, well, this is all going to go away. But then the loans are sold to these other companies, these companies that have just sprung up in order to recall the loans. So that's where it gets interesting.
Well, I've first talk a little bit more about it, because I've heard about these companies, and it's not new. It's like a gambling debt, isn't it? That the mafia sell off your debt to somebody else, and then you go and collect it, and three heavy guys knock on the door and say, "You now owe us," and it's gone up by 25%. That's the rough end of it, the street end. You're basically talking about the more corporate end. He wears a suit and a tie, but says exactly the same thing. So the question is, those are legal processes. They're absolutely legal processes to sell off your debt to somebody else. Debt recovery companies do it all the time. So is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's really pretty crazy. So the article that we wrote wasn't even about the whole loan charge situation as a whole. So the HMRC, a lot of people already settled with it completely, and they had to pay back, let's say, 20 or 30% of their income, or the income that wasn't taxed. And then they were all in the clear. But what's happened now is these companies have bought up the quote unquote debt, which is their entire salary. So they've already paid tax on their salary now with HMRC, but these companies are going after their entire salary. So the case that we were talking about, where 10 people have sadly lost their lives and everything, isn't even the tip of the iceberg of just how bad this is. And HMRC, who were everyone's best friend when it came to paying back the debt or paying back the tax, have just stood back on this and said it's for the courts to decide, because loans are legally enforceable. So that's where the crazy aspect comes in on this.
Boy, are they using the tactics of the old-fashioned debt collector who's bought the debt, where somebody's knocking on your door every 2 minutes and demanding money with hidden menaces? Because obviously demanding money with menaces is an offence, a criminal offence, but with hidden menaces is enough. Two big guys and you get the message, don't you? Are they using that sort of tactic, or are they using the more slippery, lawyery tactic? If you don't pay this within 10 days, we'll take X, Y, and Z. Or are they using both?
So they're very careful with what they're doing, and they're using the lawyer tactic. So a lot of people are getting bombarded with letters and notices saying that they owe a massive amount of money to this company that they've never heard of, which just so happens to buy up the debt. And upon investigation, they've realized that they've obviously bought up the debt and that this needs to go to court. there's nothing really you can do. So in the sense of it's not having someone banging your door, threatening you, saying you must pay up. In a way, I'd say this is worse because at least with them, you can call the police. These people, in a way, have their law on this or the law on their side until they win or lose in court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And obviously, this raises, an incredibly uncomfortable situation for contractors because, taking it to, issuing court, settling in court is costly. It's stressful. They then need to find legal representation that actually understands what's going on, which is, slightly more challenging, than it sounds. I spoke to one of the contractors I interviewed said to me that the letters that she was that she was being bombarded with weren't threatening per se, so they weren't menacing, but they were just factually incorrect. And she said she just didn't understand. She said, the letters were talking about monies owed by her, you offering her opportunities to settle early, and telling her, signposting her to take complaints to financial ombudsman. So she was just incredibly confused. She was a single mum. Her daughter, I think, was a very young baby at the time. There was a contact email on the letter, but it was a very generic mailbox. There were no responses from that mailbox. But she said it was just letter after letter after letter. And she was a really intelligent woman, so she contacted Martin Lewis even, and she was trying to source this herself. She was trying to kind of unravel what on earth was going on and who exactly she owed the money to. And the interesting thing about this lady was that she actually lives in Scotland, and as we know, the court of the Court of England and Wales kind of doesn't cover Scotland. So one of her questions was, is this actually legally binding in Scotland? And again, she could get no answer. She contacted Parliament, she contacted her MP, she contacted, she sent me files worth of, years worth of correspondence. And, one of the things that I said to her is, you must be exhausted. And she said, yeah. And one of the, again, a really heartbreaking thing that she said to me was, she said, I feel that they took away my quality time with my newborn. This took up so much of my headspace that, I wasn't able to enjoy my baby. And it was heartbreaking.
I think we need to sort of clarify one aspect straight away, and that's that it's nothing to do with intelligence. We live in an interdependent world, and people have a whole lot of different skills, and that's a positive, but it's also an extreme negative. You can't make electricity yourself. So although we think we're bright, if everything turned off today, practically most of us in what we would call, I don't know, in fact, all the world now, to be fair, I was going to say the first world, but all the world, we'd actually be struggling because
imagine. Oh, can you imagine? I mean,
we're so interdependent.
If I take my kids camping and they, the first thing they do is go to knock on the campsite,
exactly,
door and say, can I have the Wi-Fi password?
Exactly, and where's the Caligas, and et cetera, et cetera. So without that, so what I'm saying is, if you're not in that particular domain, and I think listeners should understand that if they fall into this, then it's problematic for you. It's not a matter of being bright or not. Because I'm making a whole host of connections. You've mentioned, Bowie, quite rightly, the post office scheme. I'm also thinking of things like, that's just come to my mind that I can think about, these sort of schemes whereby people bought into a holiday home somewhere, and the person who bought it's even died, and they try and take the money from the the survivors, be they children or the wife or the husband or whatever it might be. These legal parameters actually continue way past the original signing of a documentation because you've signed yourself into something which 9 times out of 10 people aren't aware what they've actually done in that initial stage. Is this what we're talking about with this scheme? When they signed into it, was there a whole host of legal bylaws and parameters which basically said you're in and you've agreed it? Is that the background to it?
There was a bunch of paperwork put in people's faces and essentially told that already in a rush to get on board with a new contract and told that if they sign it, they can then work for the client. That's the problem. And back in these days when people signed on for these schemes, no one really had any clue what it was or why they were being paid in the form of a loan. People just thought that it was something which this umbrella company was doing in particular, potentially because it was more tax efficient, not necessarily because it was illegal. Because at the time, it wasn't even illegal. If someone looked into it, it would have been more of a gray area.
And so one of the
Sorry,
things
I'm just going to ask Boyd, just whilst we're on that loan bit, I just wanted either you or Boyd to just answer the thing that a lot of people will be thinking. What is the loan aspect? Just to clarify that fully.
So in the UK, you obviously, if you're working for yourself, you get a certain amount of money that comes in. So you get 12,570, which is tax free. And then the rest of the money that you would obviously need to pay either dividends tax on it, or you would need to pay PAYE. But the loan aspect of it was what a few companies did, which was loans technically aren't taxable. So what you could have is someone lend you money essentially with no intention of reclaiming the money. And that was how people
Ah,
got around paying tax. And then these loans would have just been in the contractor's heads, written off. No one's going to come after them, whatever, because that was what the paperwork trail led to essentially. But the true drama with this comes from the fact that people have bought up the bad debt and are now enforcing the loans, which weren't money. The loans weren't money coming from one to another person with the purpose of getting repaid. It was someone's salary.
so
So
now I understand it fully. So it's the loan bit that's the important aspect in all of this in terms of the continuance. Because if it wasn't the loan bit, there'd be no money to pay back once you paid the HMRC. But because you accepted it as a loan, you've now got monies to pay back based on a loan. Am I right now?
yeah, so HMRC categorized it as a form of income, which is how they came after everybody for it. But then the people that bought up the bad debt, because it was still on the books from these companies that went down, are now categorizing it as a loan again. And the interesting aspect here is HMRC are staying out of it because they've gotten what they wanted from most contractors. They've gotten repaid with interest. But HMRC have essentially gone, this is income. The other company is going, this was a loan. And HMRC are staying out of it and saying it's for the courts to decide. That is what I find really fascinating and really bizarre with this.
Boy, I can see that. I can absolutely see that if you take the letter of the law and the principle of, a government organization, probably the most powerful because you're talking about the Treasury, you're talking about money going to the Crown originally and now obviously to the executive, to the government. But the point is that they've got their money. Job done, right?
Exactly.
What's it got to do with us? Now you've signed this basically civil contract with a company that says this is a loan. Down to you, my friend. Why would we spend our money arguing that it is or it isn't? I can see
Exactly.
that now.
And the ludicrous aspect of it is the loan that's being called in is the entire sum that you got. So that would from your salary. So that would also include the money that you had to pay to HMRC. So a lot of people will be out if they paid everything, like 120% or something.
Yeah,
It's mental.
yeah, absolutely.
and that's before we look at the interest, because a lot of these companies
Oh,
have actually added, compound interest onto these loans as well. I mean, this is like, as Barry says, this is just insanity. Like, look, I think it's about time that we named and shamed some of these companies.
be careful
Um,
now. Be careful now. Name and shame if you've evidential elements towards that. But you are alleging that this is the case on these companies. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important. I think it would be helpful that we name some of the key players in this.
Yeah.
And I think, go on.
So Fergus, I'll leave the naming and shaming to you on this one.
Yeah. I would not name nor shame. I would allege that various companies were involved. That's how I would put it. We're talking with slippery characters, so we need to be slippery ourselves. So basically, we're just saying that these were the companies that may or may not have been involved in this particular sphere that your investigation has pointed to, Fergus. Correct.
Yes, absolutely. Now, the reason that I'm going to read, I'm going to read these companies out as a list, and what I would like listeners to do is please think about whether or not they've encountered any of these companies in any way, shape, or form. And if they have, I would encourage them to get in touch. Our contact details are always on the podcast link, but I think that the important thing for contractors to understand, or former contractors to understand, is that they are not alone. If they
let me add another element to that, Ferg, just jumping in quite slightly, because you are investigating this as a journalist, and you still have investigative tools that you may or may not wish to return to subsequently at a later stage. So if anybody's got something there, and you may even be able to provide some sort of lay assistance because of the investigations that you've undertaken. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very
so
good.
Look, the main key players in this, the most prolific company is a company called West 28th. There's a subsidiary that's called West 28th Street, and there's another one that's called West 13th. There's another key player, which is a company called Limelight, a company called Felicitas, a company called Calligraphy, a company called Opus, and a company called Garraway. I would say that the majority of the majority of that list that I've just read out has multiple registered entities that they either used as shelf companies or switch companies.
So that was part one of this week's Black Spy podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll have part two next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.